Hello, it's lovely to see you all. I hope you're all feeling really fresh after last night's activities. I certainly am. So I'm really excited because Edward hasn't spoken here before, and this is one of the first times people from Row IT have actually spoken, and they've been a sponsor for ages. So yeah, thanks for sponsoring, and it's amazing to finally have one of you talk. I'm really excited about this as well because it's not just the total AI will solve all your problems talk, which is the kind of thing we usually get. So yeah, I'm really excited to see a different take on that. Please welcome Edward to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? I've got one of these amazing things on that I never know if it works or not. Edward Williams, here to talk a little about my thoughts and some of my history with AI. I don't know if anyone was in the room before when Vim was talking, but I've already taken some lessons from her, so I too am an introvert. I've not gone for the golden shoes. For me, it's flowery shirts and waistcoats is my coping mechanism. Also, very last minute and ill-prepared, I feel, on some of my prep for this, so apologies if I ramble on. I'm sure someone will tell me if I go over my time. So yeah, here to talk about AI. Does anyone recognise the picture?
Yes.
Yeah, good. I'll be asking some more questions as we go through. So Hal, or to give him his Sunday best name, Hal 9000 from 2001 Space Odyssey, made his debut in 1968, year I was born, funnily enough. And the thing that's interesting is how long AI has been in existence, because it's a lot longer than most people think. Most people see AI as a key part of digital transformation. It's become a real driving force. And I've worked actually in AI. My history goes back some 30 years when I worked with Unilever Foods originally on an AI program. And apart from the AI, I learned two things from Unilever. One was just how many brands Unilever actually has. It's astonishing. It goes on and on. If you're on the beach today and you fancy a Magnum ice cream, that's Unilever. If you have a cup of PG Tips, that's Unilever. Just amazing. But the more serious thing I learned was when Unilever need to go up against a competitor and win market, they go with one of two strategies. They either improve their product or they improve their packaging. And the latter one can seem quite trivial, but it can really be quite effective. And so if you take tea, for example, strange shaped tea bags makes people buy more tea. The little tab that lets you put them in the cup so you don't boil your fingers, that's packaging. And foil wrap freshness, eco packaging, it all improves sales. More recently, I've worked in digital transformation. And digital transformation, some might say, is a packaging change from the old technology-enabled change. I'll come a little to that because I don't agree with that. But AI certainly has undergone, over the years, many packaging changes. So I'll talk a little about AI. I'll talk a little about machine learning. AI is quite an old term. Machine learning is much more recent. It's that branch of AI that actually self-tunes and you don't program it in a traditional sense. Now, when I started, I did machine learning. It just wasn't called that. We have deep learning. Now, deep learning it sounds fantastic. Who doesn't want some deep learning in their environment? 30 years ago, I called those neural networks, and they haven't changed hugely in all of that time. And the point is, if AI has changed, it's become more marketable. The packaging helps with the concepts and getting them over. And that's hugely important. And as a result, the feel is it's become such a key part of digital. It must be new like digital. It must be fantastic. And it's part of the digital toolkit, if you like. And when I do a digital type project with clients, it comes up so regularly. And you'd think it would come up so regularly, it would be quite a successful technology. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this talk was there's actually a stark reality with AI projects, and that's how much of them fail. Some recent studies showed that 85% don't make it into production. And those that do, 70% of them don't really give any discernible value. So we're talking about the value here of AI being the 30% of the 15%. That's a really quite small return on investment. And the investment in AI is huge. I saw some figures for just the investment in the US is around $77 billion they expect this year, up over 50% from last year. And when these things fail, they fail quite spectacularly sometimes. So there's quite a famous, in the health industry, a decision support tool. It ran for 10 years, the project. They pulled the plug on it when people realized that the decisions it was making were more life-threatening than life-enhancing. And that came in at a cost of $62 million, effectively written off. So part of this is around what can we actually do to try and improve that? Because that's if you're entering today into an AI project in your organization, there's a very real danger you're going to fall into some of these statistics. And so you have a read around why things fail. Now, I was talking to a colleague a few weeks ago, and he was very keen to stress it's not the AI that fails. It's not the AI itself that fails. The algorithms that have been around for so long, they've been around for so long for a reason, and that's because they work. They do what they're expected to do. It's the implementation of your AI that's at fault often. And that can take a few different forms. So data becomes quite key to how your AI actually performs. The old adage of rubbish data in, rubbish data out, it's never more true than in an AI implementation. There's a tendency to think it can do more than it should, kind of elevated business kind of objectives. Organizations, when they work with AI, they often run an AI project quite in the background. It's considered a back office project, and that means that often it's either a data science project or an IT project, and it runs quite in the dark, and then it's not embedded well into the organisation when it's complete. The operational side often gets overlooked, and all of this leads to I think a trust issue, and I'll come to this as well because there's a lot of research being done around. Do we trust AI as consumers when we're using an AI solution? And quite apart from the statistic around the fear of the rise of the machines and fueled to some extent when visionaries like Bill Gates, like Professor Stephen Hawking, like Elon Musk kind of offer thoughts around the dangers of AI, that doesn't help. But even if you're not in that kind of cohort, people still get a little creeped out by AI sometimes. Now I'm doing a talk on AI, and it's the law that I have to have at least one slide that shows some graphs, and those graphs have to have two wiggly lines on them, one of which demonstrates reality and one of which demonstrates how the AI is performing against them. Now, that's one reason I put this on. The other reason I put this on is because I work for Row IT, as has been said. We've got a fantastic group of people who work with us, some of which are in the audience today, and they haven't heckled me yet. So, as I say, great bunch of people. And we've got a fairly nascent machine learning special interest group because it's become apparent there's quite a few of us in the organisation have got some experience with machine learning. We know what we're talking about. I pulled together a few kind of slides here that demonstrate some of the work that some of our people have done. Some of it is actually quite a common way of working with AI. So the one in the top right there is the idea that you create an AI model of some industrial process or something. You get a model-based approach where your thing you've modelled is working quite happily. and the model is tracking that well, and then when they diverge, you can start doing some kind of fault or anomaly detection on it. And a colleague has done just that within the energy industry, for me to say, the energy industry. We've got some around the gaming industry using another tool as well as machine learning around a technique called the genetic algorithm or evolutionary programming. That notion that you create lots of population of a large number of solutions and you test how good they are, and you take the best and you cross them with each other and you mutate them a bit like evolution in the wild. And others that are trying to model financial data as it happens. Always a challenge, I think, to try and model the stock market, the round of parameters and variables and things that influence stock prices. I think things like that are always going to be in the 85% of failures. I think this one is proven because the guy who did this works for us now, as opposed to sitting on his yacht in the Adriatic. So AI has been around a long time. When HAL hit the movie theatres in 1968, AI was actually about to enter what was known as the AI winter. 10 years earlier, there was a huge investment in AI, a great excitement. It seemed to be able to solve everything. In the deep learning type world, there was a paper in 1958 called Perceptrons, which was the groundwork of the AI that we use today in the deep learning world. Unfortunately, about 10 years later, it was proven mathematically that couldn't solve certain types of problems. It coincided with a number of other failures in the AI world, and nothing much happened for a good 20 or so years. Until the problem started to be solved by different models, different learning techniques, different ways of wiring up these networks. And that became, in 86, the multi-layer perceptron became the basis of what we use today as a machine learning algorithm. What's happened since, to a large extent, has been complementary technologies have come along and revolutionized how we can use AI. And a huge one to me is in early 2000s when Amazon realized that it could use the technology it used for its marketplace, package that and provide it to other organizations as a platform to build their own online presence. And they came up with AWS, the first kind of public cloud offerings. That opened up the market to a power of compute and storage and all these other things that was unknown to the likes of myself when I started working with AI. And suddenly you could build networks of AI algorithms which were hugely more powerful and could run much quicker than had ever been managed previously. And in more recent times, there have been augmentations to these cloud offerings that allow the algorithms and sometimes the ways of working to become available to other organizations to build their AI solutions. So we have, in 2011, IBM launched its Watson offering. Watson, at the time, was proving very, very powerful. They taught it to win at a US game show called Jeopardy, which it managed to beat the finalists, the human finalists that had just won that game show. It's tantamount that just because it's great at one thing is not great at another. If you remember my slide with the $62 million project failure, that was an IBM Watson failure there. Alexa, pause there, just in case anyone's got one. One of the most widely used called voice recognition services that's built heavily on AI, obviously an Amazon product. And just to keep the balance, Microsoft have bought into a platform called OpenAI. If you've not used it, they targeted an ethical use of AI, that idea that AI should be used for the good of humanity and not the kind of the Terminator end of the spectrum. And what I would argue when I look at this slide, and the point for putting it up really, is the things at the top. The things at the top is where AI was being defined and built, the product was being improved. And the bits at the bottom is the packaging of that product has been improved. And to an extent where it's a really exciting time for developers. So I'm a consultant, I'm doing a presentation. It's not the law, but it's generally encouraged. I have to have a Gartner quadrant on one of my slides somewhere. And here's mine. So we have these are the AI developer tools that are available in the cloud. And as you'd expect, the big players, the AWS and the Googles, etc., are all in the top right. But there are lots of them out there. If you're a programmer as well, there's an awful lot of open source AI tools there now that you can use in your development environment, hopefully in a language of your choosing. But the point is, you can suddenly, more than ever before these days, focus not so much on the mechanics of the AI. Does the algorithms work? Have I coded it correctly? You can use all of that, and you can concentrate on the wider aspects of building an AI solution. And it's a good job you can. Now, this is my only slide with animation on it, so I'm going to hope it works. Again, a deep learning project. I've got to have something with circles and lines on it. For those of you who aren't familiar with deep learning algorithms, the idea is, say, modeled on the brain, the neurons, the synapses. Obviously, the human brain has something like 85 billion, I believe it is, neurons within it. This little neural network here has 7. So it's a trivial, illustrative problem we're going to solve here. So the idea is we could build a network to solve a particular problem. And in this particular case, how can we tell the difference between dogs and cats is the example I've chosen. Actually, in 2012, Google let loose a really quite big neural network, I think 16,000 processing elements, so my 7.1 is much more efficient. They let it loose on YouTube, and it was able to differentiate between cats and dogs, images, videos, quite successfully. And the idea is with these things is you have some outputs that you want, is it a cat, is it a dog? You have some inputs, you give it, data that you want it to learn from. The magic happens in the middle, in what are known as the hidden layers, and there's usually much more than just one, and there's, say, more than 3 nodes in there. And you repeatedly show it data, and there are different learning algorithms. There's supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, marketing. It's not marketing, it actually is the way it works, but it all sounds great. And so the idea is, in our example here, we'll show it some cats, some dogs, we'll tell it which is which, and we'll get it to light up the node effectively. I think that worked. And once you've trained it, you then have you've seen that it's, by and large, with its data, it's responding correctly, and you have a confidence that it's learned the thing that you've asked it to learn. And then you test it. And you test it in the wild, perhaps by showing it an image that it's not seen before. And you hope that it recognizes the image. Now, I'm hoping everyone in the room can tell a cat when they see one. And that is largely because we've got quite a history and a context with the subject matter. I mean, we've known of cats and dogs since we were small. Some of us have owned cats, some of us have owned dogs, some of us have owned both. Been scratched by cats, bitten by dogs, or both. We know what a cat and a dog is. But crucially, that's the neural net doesn't have that kind of concept. The deep learning algorithm, all it has is the data you're presenting it with. So if you're not presenting it with the right kind of data, or there's data that's got elements to it that it can also perhaps focus on that you weren't really intending it to focus on, it can get to a point where you think it's learnt to tell the difference between a cat and a dog, but it might have learnt something else entirely. So what if it's not learned to tell the difference between a cat and a dog? What if it's learned to tell the difference between photos that were taken inside and photos which were taken outside? Now, sharp people in the room, I'm sure you've spotted that already, but if you haven't, you'll realise that rather conveniently all the cat photographs are taken indoors and all of the dog photographs are taken outdoors. And our test here is a cat taken outdoors. So is the deep learning algorithm going to recognise that as a cat and light up the cat output, or is it going to recognise it as an outdoor photo and light up the outdoor output? And the truth is, we don't actually know, and we've never known, how a deep learning algorithm has tuned itself, has organised itself internally. The magic that happens between the inputs and the outputs is a black box. And that has very real ramifications for us. So imagine if all ginger cats had been slightly misclassified, for example, or had been omitted from the test data. How would it recognise you had a cat there? Imagine if in the preparation of the test data, someone had had a bad experience of a cat, and actually this network was trying to tell the difference between friendly pets and dangerous pets. And, thanks to their personal experiences, ginger cats had got classified more dangerously than they should. You don't know, unless you really study your data, whether that kind of unconscious bias has crept in. And we heard in Vim's talk, for those who were here earlier, that this is a genuine problem that shows itself again and again. Amazon had a solution to try and do an initial sift on its recruitment, which had to be canned because there was an unconscious bias towards male than female applicants. More recently, in the 2020, the exam, A-level exam fiasco, the predictions, there was a bias in the algorithms there towards people from a more privileged background than a less privileged background in how it recognised and graded people. And so you need to be working hard on your data, and you need to be proving, I think, to your users that your data is sound and you're using it in a good and an ethical way. Which brings us back, I guess, to digital. So I've worked in digital for many years now, digital transformation programs. I've written the digital strategy for a number of organisations, and usually with digital strategy comes digital principles. And here's some, not an exhaustive list, but these are some I tend to use, bring to the table and talk through with clients in order to try and work out what their digital strategy is. And there's a reason I think these six are quite important. And that is because it takes me back to a conversation I had some time ago where I explained in a room of people what I believe to be digital transformation. I think I was a bit long-winded, quelle surprise. I'm sure you can be surprised by that. And a colleague kind of didn't butt in, but came up with at the end, or to put it more simply, he said, you analyse your business processes and you automate your business processes. I said, not really. That's the old technology-enabled change way of doing things. Because digital transformation, if it is anything, is a real focus on your customer. If you've got business processes and they're rubbish business processes, or they deliver a rubbish service to your users and you automate them, then all you've really done is deliver the same rubbish service to your users, but a bit more efficiently. And so the focus is really here on the customer. And, whoops, wrong way. And this is a nice segue in, really, from Vim's slide earlier, which is, I say, digital transformation, if it's about anything at all, it is all about understanding your users and understanding your customers and engaging with them. Because everyone in this room has their own aspirations for when they use services, and they're all slightly different. It might be from a cultural background or a gender background or whatever it happens to be. The demographics are important, the culture is important. There are lots of other aspects of your user base that's important. And you really need to be bringing those user views into your technology-enabled change in order to make it a more digital process. I took a slide out last night because I was I was going to run over time, but one thing I was going to talk about here as well was the fact that normally when you talk to people, this seems really obvious and people nod very wisely. Yes, we must include our users, and then they behave in ways that are completely counter to that. We don't need to involve our users that much because we understand our users. We know what they want. Not always the case, rarely the case. Others want to rush to market with something. They're in a hurry to get there. You know, involving users takes time. We've got deadlines to hit. Our competitors are stealing a march on us. Often elongates the process. And the danger you've got is if you're a public sector company and you deliver, you know, poor digital services, and I've worked with governments that have done this, often the motivation is to try and get your citizens to use those services and not phone you up quite so much or come into call centres to take up staff time. But they just won't use the digital services if they're not, because they'll still do those things, so you will have failed. And if you're a private sector company, commercial company, and you've got poor digital offerings, then your customers will simply go and use your competitors' better digital offerings. So it's really important to get it right. So trying to bring this back a little to AI here, and this notion of trust, and how we can bring our users in. If anyone's never looked at datareportal.com, it's really quite an interesting site. They do a report every year on across the world on internet users' interactions with various parts of the internet, and you can draw some interesting data from it. So a couple that I pulled out is around the use of sensitive data, our online use of sensitive data, and for the likes of Joe Public, yourselves and myself, nothing is more sensitive really than our health data. Nothing is more sensitive than our money data. And I've drawn out, what's going on across the world, what's going on in the UK, and then pulled out who the kind of the world leader is for each of these, just for comparison purposes. So in the UK, we're much happier using financial services online than we are using health services. We're ahead of the curve, if you like, on one, but not on the other. Some other interesting analysis is around the use of some of those applications, and I pulled out a couple which are often quite well associated with AI technologies. Image recognition. You upload your photo to your cloud-based photo library, and it catalogues it automatically. I can now search for my kids, because it recognises the ones that got my girls in them, and it catalogues accordingly. We don't seem to like that very much in the UK, certainly not as much as the Colombians do, who seem to really love it. I don't know why that is. I don't know if I'm representative of the UK, but when it comes to image recognition technology, I find it starting to get into the creepy level of AI usage. I know that it might be quite useful to be able, when I upload my photos to my Amazon Prime account, to have them all nicely catalogued for me. But I know that Facebook can do this on a global scale. I know that Facebook, someone might have taken a picture in a restaurant, and I happen to be in the background. Suddenly, it's known I was in that restaurant. They might not publish it, but I know they've got that technology there to try and recognize me. And the conspiracy theorists will reckon that there's a big database held of all of this kind of information somewhere behind the scenes. But the point is, AI can sometimes feel more creepy in its use than useful, and there's a fine balance and a fine line there. I took out my quadrant slide. Vim left hers in, but I have a slide that talks about the trust and value between your AI services and your customer value. We're much happier with voice assistants, the Alexas of this world. I find them quite frustrating. Some people reckon we're getting close to HAL with Alexa, but frankly, I turn the Radio 4 on every morning as part of my breakfast routine. Alexa, play Radio 4. And she plays Radio 4. The odd morning I go in and say, Alexa, put the radio on. She chooses some music based on my Amazon Music selections, which is, it's kind of a nice trick, but you'd think an intelligent voice assistant would know that 9 times out of 10 I ask for Radio 4, so perhaps I want Radio 4 that time. I don't specify it exactly. And one of the problems that we get with internet usage, AI aside, is the fact that people are quite concerned with how organisations use their data anyway. This is some statistics, again, from Data Reportal from 2020 that says, worldwide, 60% of people don't trust organisations with their data. They think they're doing something they shouldn't be doing with their data. It's slightly less in the UK. For some reason, Colombians don't trust it at all. Maybe it's all the image recognition technology they use that makes them distrustful. I don't know, but they are the most distrustful nation on earth. If there's any Colombians around, please, I'll have a chat with you afterwards because I'd love to know why that is. But the problem is, we are mistrustful with data. And CBI has done some work around AI specifically and trust. Because the CBI reckons that if we can nail the trust issue, we can improve the GDP just in this country alone by about 10% by 2030, I believe it is, which is quite a huge increase. And it's a huge loss if we can't get it right. And they've come up with three E's of improving the way that the public views organisations' use of AI and improves their trust. The first is to embed governance boards. This has become quite common in a lot of organisation ethics boards as part of the governance. Are we doing things in an ethical way? Not just AI, but generally, it's not a question of are we obeying the law or not obeying the law. It's a question of should we be doing this ethically or should we not be doing it? When it comes to developing, there's a huge emphasis on collaboration there. Bring in more people, more of your team. Don't make this the IT solution. Don't make it the data science solution. Make it the business solution. Bring in a team from across the business. They're more likely to challenge than the way we're doing things. And then finally, extend this out to your customers, to your users, and make sure they're engaged. And make sure they understand how their data is being used and what decisions are being made with that data, and be able to offer them, when they challenge the things like the unconscious bias that might exist, how you're actually dealing with that. Do those things and the chances are you might avoid the tissue rejection that sometimes accompanies AI solutions at the moment. And the great thing is, we know how to do this as Agile practitioners. This is Agile on the beach. No one actually said if it was the law or not, but I believe I'm supposed to probably have some kind of Agile-related slide on there. So we know when we're delivering digital change projects, we know how to engage people now. We do this all the time. If you follow the government, the GDS service manual, you will often have your discovery, your alpha, beta and live processes in there, your public betas and private betas, or vice versa, hopefully. And you'll have your sprint ceremonies, and you will engage your users as often as you can is the key. It really is. Don't think one level of interaction is probably enough. Keep them engaged right the way through. At Rowe, we practice this all the time with our clients, and we try to engage as much as possible. We have discovery workshops, we have UX experience type sessions, we build prototypes, we test them with our user cohort and have them challenged and changed. And it seems so obvious, but I seriously believe we don't do this with our AI projects quite the same. They remain a back office in the dark system, and we need to bring them out into the light as we have done with our digital projects, and therefore make them more transparent to our end users and get them engaged far more. And that's really brings me to the end. I I should have said at the start, I've got time for questions at the end if I get there in time, and I think I have, because I didn't know how long I would talk for. But just to leave you with the message that the AI that we use today, we've used the AI for a long, long time. The product is fine. It's had its challenges, but by and large, those have been overcome technically. I say that the product has been refined to the point where it works well. But it retains probably its biggest challenge is that that unknown element of how it's actually working, and that ultimately leads to a problem with end users' trust in those algorithms. And if you can't win that trust, then you're going to be part of that 85% fail. And to win the trust, we just need to do what we do with our other digital projects. We need to engage people far more. We need to bring them in. If we're running an AI project, we need to have the touch points regularly with our clients, with our customers, with our end users. And you need to do it often. You need to consider the full range of options available to you to do that engagement, and you need to run it regularly throughout the development life cycle of your AI program. And I think that's it. Maybe I should have taken out fewer slides. I don't know. But thank you. Is there any questions? Oh, there's a hand up at the back.
Thank you. Very interesting. I just wanted to question a little bit around the privacy and to what extent all of those efforts in involvement, which I can see are very important in creating trust and things. But actually, what I think, if we really go back out of our bubble of the IT world and back into the real world, that the privacy debate actually becomes an equation between usefulness and privacy, and that the generally Joe public is prepared to sacrifice privacy or not think about privacy in direct relation to usefulness. And so for all of that difference there, perhaps actually it's about the great product that's there and the usefulness of it, and actually sometimes pushing things forward. So why is financial better accepted than health? It's probably not because there are more risks around health, and I'd rather somebody knew my health conditions and clear my bank accounts out, to be absolutely honest. But it's in fact because companies have pushed the boundaries further, but in pushing the boundaries have also created great product.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you're quite right. I think if you look at the way AI is often deployed, they're certainly online. A lot of the times we interact with it is that we know about is when we use the so-called free services that are online. And I say so-called because we know full well they're not free. We are exchanging our data in return for that service. And certainly in the big social media platforms, it's people are becoming very switched on, aren't they, to potentially how that data is being used. And again, sometimes it's in your face and you can kind of see it when you shop for something, for example, that you don't, so once every now and again shopping experience. You bought a new phone, you're in the market perhaps for a new cover for it. You've had a little search online, you go on Facebook, and lo and behold, all the adverts are about phone covers. Suddenly it's like, bloody hell, how did you get that? But then there's all the stuff that happens behind the scenes, the Cambridge Analytica model of, is your data actually being used in ways to influence decisions that you can't see? And that's where sometimes those ethics boards help. The governance. There's a recognition that there's a strengthening of governance around, the difference between can we do it legally is one question, but should we do it ethically is another. And also there's the fact that, these days we are more in the market of consent, as well, we've got to request consent from our user base about what we use data for. Now, health data, I worked in the health, I worked for the NHS for many years, and one of the key uses of data that you can gather from your users is around, what they call secondary use. Can you predict trends in health behaviours, and can you influence those from a public health point of view? Not necessarily something I've given consent for my data to be used in that way. And whether you consider that a valid use or not is a personal choice. But these days you've got to ask consent for that. So there's a whole element there around your consent model and how you get that consent. But I don't know if that answers the question directly. But I mean, your point is a good one. That the balance between privacy and value is interesting. The quadrant slide I took out was measured the value of your supplier reputation, your reputation of the organisation versus the value you provide, and the higher the value of your service, and the better your reputation, you become quite a prized asset of the customer. And the bad quadrant that no one wants to be in is a low value, low reputation service, which people just will shy away from using. The dangerous one, I think, on there is when it's a high value service, but your reputation for how you use data is quite low, because there you're in the realms of your customers will just tolerate your service until they can use something that they feel more comfortable with.
Thank you. I'm a plant, so because I'm a researcher, there I said it, I'm out. But I would love to know how you're testing, the methods you're using to test this stuff. I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, let's do more testing, engage with users more with things, but it's really interesting to see what's good and bad about, or things that really work in different scenarios. So what works for you?
Well, it's not really what works for me. It's what works. Every deployment, every implementation is different. When I talked quite briefly, maybe too briefly, around those those digital principles that I use, there's one on there around data centricity, and there's quite often I found a notion from my clients that the idea of being data-centric as an organisation is focusing on the data they hold and how to make better use of it and how to gain insights. But one thing I'm very keen on when we deploy digital solutions is to actually gather data on how those solutions are used, because that then forms those objective measures about how well they're being used, and whether there are bottlenecks, pinch points within the use. And that can lead to quite interesting insights about how you might want to change your service to make them more trusted, more usable. An example I'd like to give is some work I did with the Jersey government. They were implementing some digital services, and they, as part of that process, they needed to implement a digital identity solution. It's quite a common notion in public sector services. You need to know who you're dealing with, and that person is who they say they are. I mean, it's a whole topic in itself. But where do you establish, if it's a new time user, if it's a first time user, and they need to establish and set up their digital identity, where do you do that? And if you do it up front in the process, quite often the user won't go through the process, because you're necessarily asking them quite personal questions about themselves to establish that identity. You might be doing credit checks, so you want to, their digital footprint in the finance world, you need to ask them questions about that to make sure they are who they say they are. We've all seen the thing of, you spent £100 last month, where did you spend it type question. People don't want to go through that process if that's what the first thing they see. So you move it towards the end, or the point where you absolutely have to ask. You need to get them engaged in the service first, get them to see some of the value in the service, and then start asking them. the questions that they actually by that stage start to feel more comfortable with, because they can see the value of the service you're offering them. And it's quite interesting, and it's something that's been adopted quite a lot with online services. You know, you read an abstract of an interesting paper, and it's download the full paper here, and it's only when you go there that you've then got to start answering a whole load of questions about yourself. But by then you're quite interested in what you've read, and you want to read the rest of it. If the first thing you were asked was, give us all your personal details and we'll give you a paper, you know, you probably would think, well, I'll find something else actually. So I think the key is to, as part of your design of your service and your AI, is to actually put measure points in there about how your users are using the service, because if there's certain points where they stop using it, that's the point you need to focus on fixing.
Okay, I think we're out of time for questions now.
Oh, okay.
But Edward, that was amazing. Thank you. Everyone give, yeah.